and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Tuesday the 27th of June. This is GB Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
And in another televised address, Vladimir Putin has vowed to track down the Wagner mutineers as he tries to reassert his crumbling authority in Russia. We're going to be speaking to a Russia expert to find out the latest.
Each migrant deported to Rwanda will cost you, the taxpayer, almost £170,000. Home Secretary Suella Braverman argues that doing nothing is not an option. She's right, isn't she? But is £170,000 per person worth it?
And a damning report on cricket's attitude to ethnic minorities and women. The report's authors express shock that Eton and Harrow play at Lord's every year, but the England women's team have never played a single match, the home of English cricket.
And the mayor of the country's greatest city, Manchester, I would say that, Andy Burnham, joins us to discuss the UK's housing crisis. We're looking forward to hearing what he and Labour would do to fix this huge problem. This is Britain's Newsroom. Thank you for joining us this morning. Let us know your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address, as always. But first of all, here are your news headlines with Tamsin Roberts.
Thank you and good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 9:32. Matt Hancock has arrived at the COVID-19 inquiry as hearings continue into the government's preparation for the pandemic. The former Health Secretary will appear before the inquiry as he was one of the politicians who steered the coronavirus response before being forced to quit in June 2021. Food inflation has eased for a second month as supermarkets cut the price of household staples. Figures from the British Retail Consortium show that shop price inflation overall slowed to 8.4% in June, down from 9% in May. The British Retail Consortium says if the current situation continues, it should drop to single digits later this year. Labour will force a vote in the House of Commons on their proposals to ease the mortgage crisis. It comes after last week's Bank of England interest rate hike. Labour's plan includes forcing banks to help mortgage holders struggling with payments by allowing them to temporarily switch to interest-only payments or lengthen their mortgage period. New measures have been announced to tackle the non-consensual sharing of intimate images online. Amendments to the Online Safety Bill will remove the need to prove intent to cause distress, making it easier to charge and convict offenders. Those found guilty could face up to 6 months in jail, and if the intent to distress is proven, a maximum of 2 years in custody. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, back to Andrew and Bev.
To our top story today, a defiant Vladimir Putin has addressed the Russian nation again in a late-night broadcast, blasting the attempted Wagner mutiny over the weekend. A
short, sharp and full of Putin's typically vitriol and bluster, here is some of Putin last night.
This civil solidarity has shown that any blackmail, any attempt to create internal turmoil is doomed to failure. I repeat, we saw the greatest consolidation of society, executive and legislative power at all levels, a firm, unambiguous position in support of the constitutional order was taken by public organisations, religious denominations, leading political parties.
So joining us now is Dr. Stephen Hall, lecturer in Russian and post-Soviet politics at Bath University. Good morning to you. What do you make of this recent turn of events since the weekend with this supposed coup attempt? Is that your assessment of the situation?
Well, I think, there's been a lot of events, a lot of rumours. I think that it was an attempt at Prigozhin felt that he wasn't getting the ear of Putin, and in order to make a decision in Russia, one has to get to Putin, and so he felt that there was a need to get Putin's ear, and there was an attempted rebellion, certainly, with the Wagner Group moving from taking Rostov very quickly, moving through Voronezh, Lipetsk, and getting to within effectively the gates of Moscow. So yes, certainly there was a rebellion, although coup is also another phrase we use as well.
But Dr. Hall, if he was trying to get the ear of Putin, we understood he wanted to be shot of the defence minister, who he blames for a lot of the problems in the conflict with Ukraine, and yet we saw the defence minister out and about yesterday, deliberately in public, in a sense, Putin saying to Wagner, he's still my man.
Well, certainly Putin has never taken particularly well to someone else telling him what to do, and the idea that Prigozhin started a rebellion in order to get Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, removed, and also the head of the army, Valery Gerasimov, removed, is something that Putin was never going to do. What Wagner got out of this, we still don't know, and it seems increasingly that Putin didn't provide Prigozhin with an awful lot. So it certainly was an attempt to get Putin's ear, but it failed fairly spectacularly.
I was going to say, how damaged is he, though, Putin, by this, even if the coup failed?
Right. I think certainly Putin is damaged. The fact that he's always talked about the stability, and yet there was a rebellion, and more importantly, that within less than 2 days, they managed to get within 200 kilometres of Moscow, highlights how weak the power vertical was, and also how weak the security services were. The simple fact that very few came out in support of Putin, they were waiting for an order that never came.
Obviously, President Biden is keen to distance himself from any suggestion that he was involved in any sort of deal with Prigozhin. Does that sound credible to you?
Well, I think that I've seen the rumours that Prigozhin apparently was going to get $6.8 billion from America for starting this rebellion. I don't necessarily believe those rumours. I think that's a conspiracy theory. I think it's very clear that for the Americans that they need to show that they were not part of it, because they certainly will be blamed. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, came out and said that the West was behind this. This is very much a Russian perception that there is no bottom-up that can happen in Russia. It is always supported by an external entity, and most likely that's either George Soros or the CIA. So Biden had to come out fairly quickly and say this, and we also saw the American ambassador in Moscow meeting with dignitaries in the Kremlin and saying exactly the same thing, and this has also been repeated by the EU and by other Western states as well.
The initial reaction, of course, for many of us when we heard about the troops marching on Moscow, got within 120 miles, it was great, Putin could be on the way out. But actually, perhaps it's better the devil you know, because Prigozhin is a vicious brute. He's prosecuted terrible conflicts in Sudan and Ukraine. Perhaps he would have prosecuted an even more vicious war against Ukraine if he ousted Putin.
Well, I think so. You're absolutely correct. Prigozhin is vicious, to put it mildly. And so if Putin was removed and Prigozhin was to take power, then we would certainly see a more vicious campaign against Ukraine. That is one of the reasons why Prigozhin wanted to remove Shoigu, partially because of his incompetence, but also because, like many patriots or Z-patriots, he perceived that the Russian army simply was being ineffectual and being far too weak. So, yes, if Putin had lost power and Prigozhin had come to power, then this would be a very different situation. It would be far more dangerous for Ukraine at the current time.
It's easy to forget when we're watching images of very powerful men blaming each other that at the bottom of this war there are thousands of Russian and Ukrainian men who are losing their lives and being injured every day, Stephen. Whenever the suggestion of any sort of diplomatic solution is heard, it tends to be you can't negotiate with Putin, you mustn't negotiate with Putin. Over the years, world leaders have negotiated with people just as bad as President Putin. So why no attempt at all at diplomacy here?
Well, I think that there's certainly talk of beginning to think about negotiations. We've seen various peace deals coming from places like South Africa. We've also seen talk that there will be meetings in Copenhagen or possibly Paris as to finding a peace deal. The EU and America have always said that they will follow the Ukraine peace plan. What has to happen in regards to Russia is you don't negotiate with Putin when Putin believes that you are weak. That has always been the problem that Western governments have done before. And I think there is now this perception of change, that you need to negotiate with Putin from a position of strength. That means that Ukraine needs to be supported, and at the very least, at the moment, and that Ukraine has to be helped to get into that position of strength in order to then negotiate with Russia.
And for Zelensky, of course, for him, how would he negotiate? Because, of course, he wants not just the territory back that's been stolen since last February, but he also wants the Crimea, which was annexed back in 2014. And there's no way Putin would certainly give in the Crimea at the very least.
Well, I think that's the whole point of negotiations. You start from a position of what you absolutely want and you work down. This is all hypothetical at the moment. Both sides aren't willing to negotiate, especially Russia, as far as I can see. And so at the moment, there isn't. We don't need to. We can certainly consider the idea of negotiations, but it isn't going to happen until Russia is in a position of weakness and until the Ukrainians have been provided with the support necessary to put them in that position of strength, and then negotiations can begin. Both sides have always said that for the Russians that there is now facts on the ground that Ukraine has to accept. The Ukrainians have said that they want to go back to their 1991 borders, which is perfectly acceptable. So, you know, again, this is negotiations. You start from a position of where you want to be and you work backwards.
OK. Thank you, Stephen. Really interesting. Dr. Stephen Hall there, lecturer in Russian at Bath University.
I thought Putin sounded increasingly mad and looked increasingly mad.
Yeah.
I mean, absolute monarchs, absolute power, absolute madness. And
I think he probably knows that this is for the long haul. There's doesn't appear to be any incentive from the West to try to sort out broker any sort of peace deal. Absolutely.
Now, the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, remember him? Is today set to be the latest high-profile politician. He'll be before that COVID inquiry. Hearings continue in London. This is about examining our preparedness for the pandemic. They are not going to be talking about care homes.
Not yet. But joining us now to look ahead to Hancock's inquiry is GBNews political editor Tom Harwood. Good morning, Tom. Just explain to us, as we alluded to there, this inquiry comes in rather excruciating stages. What is this one and what is he expected to talk about this morning?
That's precisely right. What's going on at the moment, and we've seen some of these hearings already in recent days, is about the preparedness of the country in the run-up to the onset of the pandemic. That means what Matt Hancock will be speaking about today will be from his time from 2018 through to 2020 as Health Secretary, rather than after March 2020 through to 2021. That perhaps is the more interesting part of his time as Health Secretary, but at the moment these hearings, as we've seen with David Cameron, as we've seen with George Osborne, as we've seen with Professor Chris Whitty and all the rest of them, it's been about that period in the run-up to the onset of the pandemic. How prepared as a country were we? Was enough done to foresee the onset of such a global pandemic? And exactly what decisions were made? Matt Hancock will be speaking at this inquiry, asked questions of him and all the rest of it from around 10 a.m. He's already entered the building this morning, so no doubt will be preparing for that forensic inquisition by the inquiry's lawyers.
Be like not the main event in a sense, because when he'll be back probably next year when he'll be talking about care homes, because we've got, as Bev alluded to, this is grinding incredibly slowly and could go on till 2026 or even 2027.
It could indeed. However, what the inquiry say is that there will be sort of interim conclusions to this inquiry. So it's not as if we all have to hold our breath and wait until 5 years' time when it's all signed, sealed and delivered. There will be, because of the sort of stage model that we're seeing here at this inquiry, interim conclusions along the way. So at the moment, all of these hearings, all of these questioning sessions are about the preparedness of the pandemic. It's likely there will be some sort of interim conclusion around all of those hearings and all of that information drawn up in the not too distant future. However, of course, many more stages to come in this inquiry. This is just the beginning.
We're seeing some protesters in the background, Tom. I didn't realise where this is being held. I now know, because I drive past this every day, and I've wondered what the crowd was outside every day, and the photographers. It's such a controversial issue. People feel so strongly about it from every direction, and I think there's a huge interest in this story, actually, even though part of us wants to go, can we just forget it all and move on? And then part of us goes, no, we really, really need to learn the lessons for next time. We're going to be taking the footage live of Matt Hancock talking a bit later.
Well. Before we let you go, Tom, big story as well today. The government's own calculation suggesting it will cost £169,000 to ship a single asylum seeker to Rwanda. It's a high price to pay. I'd say, if that's what it's going to cost, then we'll have to pay it, because it is the great deterrent policy.
Well, that's precisely the logic of the government. They never assumed that this would be a cheap policy, but the question is, if you can get a few asylum seekers, a few people who perhaps are illegitimately seeking asylum off to Rwanda for perhaps a very, very high price, will that stop others coming and actually save money in the long run? Or is, as so often the criticism levelled at government, is this being penny wise but pound perhaps not so wise, in that if this policy wasn't pursued, would there be a lesser deterrent effect? That's the conversation going on at the top of government, and they are pursuing with this policy despite the cost.
Verdict from the Court of Appeal as early as Thursday as to whether the policy is legal, because, as you know, the government won the first stage. There was an appeal, of course there was, by the charities, so we could get a verdict on Thursday, in which case they could then get on with it, Tom.
They could, however, there have been issues, of course, along the way. You'll remember that when that plane was due to take off with the asylum seekers upon it, it wasn't the fact that the plane was not allowed to fly, it's the individuals on that plane who, one by one, lawyers picked off due to ECHR appeals. And so perhaps there is a little bit further in this road to go down.
Thank you, Tom. You can see me sniggering. Now, there's a sign behind you saying, can you trust the media, or are they playing us? You can trust GB News. I would say that we are the only channel since 2020 that was asking both sides of this story, looking for sense. So in answer to that lady behind you, no, you can't trust all of them, but you can trust us.
Enjoy the protesters, Tom.
Give him my love.
That's Tom Harwood at the COVID inquiry. And, of course, Matt Hancock, just to remind you, who was Health Secretary during the pandemic. He was part of the quad of Rishi Sunak. Who was it? Rishi Sunak, Boris...
Well, Sajid Javid, Zahawi.
Yeah. And,
I have a long list.
Big decisions. Now, the Prince of Wales is continuing his tour of Britain today, unveiling 6 locations chosen to become blueprints in his new project called Homewards.
Well, yesterday, Prince William visited Lambeth, Bournemouth and Newport to launch his 5-year campaign to prove homelessness can be ended. Our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, reports.
I first visited a homelessness shelter when I was 11 with my mother. The visits we made together left a deep and lasting impression.
5 years, 6 locations, 1 dream. A personal commitment to make homelessness rare, brief and unrepeated. Homewards, launched by Prince William yesterday, supports communities across the UK selected to become blueprints for solutions to end homelessness. One such blueprint will be formed in Lambeth, bringing together local charities, experts and advocates to create a tailor-made solution to support those needing a home. His Royal Highness visited Mosaic Clubhouse, which treats mental health patients as members, focusing on their strengths rather than their weaknesses. The Prince wanted to spotlight the link between poor mental health and homelessness.
It doesn't take much for a trauma around mental health to lead to other catastrophes in life, which can lead to homelessness. If you have a relationship breakdown, and that can be followed by loss of a job, you can very quickly find yourself without a home as well.
43-year-old Paul experienced homelessness when he was younger. Poor mental health meant he ended up in hospital. He thinks ending up homeless made his mental health worse.
When I was younger, in stages where I was homeless and that sort of thing, everything just gets so overwhelming and everything that you just can't function properly and everything and that. So when there's services like this, even if you are in a position of still being homeless, a lot of weight is lifted.
Prince William's conceded ending homelessness is a big challenge. An estimated 300,000 people are either sleeping rough, sofa surfing, or stuck in temporary accommodation. And critics of the monarchy point out the future king's enormous wealth and privilege. Those close to the Prince of Wales insist he's aware of how fortunate he is, which is why he's using his public platform to promote lasting change to help end homelessness. Much better, some believe, than others.
If a politician says something, it's like in one ear and out the other sort of thing. But if someone like your future king is saying something, I think people take that a lot more to heart and serious.
The Prince of Wales also visited Bournemouth yesterday, highlighting how empowering people with skills can help them get a job, and Newport, where he saw an example of a community delivering long-term settled housing. Today, His Royal Highness continues his tour of the UK, visiting 3 more locations committed to tackling homelessness in their area. Cameron Walker, GB News, London.
Now, as anybody knows, the housing crisis at the moment is causing all sorts of problems and looks continued set to worsen. Rates of home ownership are plummeting, especially amongst the younger generation, and rents are rising fast.
Europe's biggest housing festival is taking place today in Manchester. They'll certainly have plenty to discuss. Among those attending is the Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, and he joins us now. Good morning, Andy.
Good morning, Andrew. Morning, Bev.
Morning.
Very good to talk to you. Now, what are you doing about the housing crisis in your part of the world?
We're doing a huge amount, actually, Andrew. We'll be laying out a plan today for what we are going to do to raise housing standards. So we are introducing a Greater Manchester Good Landlord Charter. For the first time, we need an actual kind of way of holding landlords to account. We are proposing a new system of property checks so that residents can say, look, my home isn't fit for habitation, this landlord's not treating me properly. We will then get a team to go in and check that out. And if necessary, take enforcement action all the way to taking ownership of the home. We've got a plan to build 30,000 truly affordable net zero homes in our city region, homes for social rent. And these are all the actions that we're putting forward. But my big message, Andrew, will be Westminster has to wake up to the full scale of the housing crisis. It's only scratching the surface at the moment. When it puts forward policies, it tends to be about home ownership and that kind of thing around first-time buyers. And important as those things are, they do not solve the housing crisis. So the time has come to wake up. We've got to raise standards in existing homes and build truly affordable new ones.
What do you make of the government dropping that target, the compulsory target of 300,000 homes, which is now an advisory target?
I don't think it gets us to where we need to go. We do have to build more homes. But to be honest, I would meet some of the campaigners halfway in saying, don't just do that all on Greenbelt. No. Actually, what you need to do is clean up brownfield in some of our parts of the north or parts of the Midlands, and then build homes for social rent on those places. That actually is a proper solution to the housing crisis. But I would say the government can't get there just by kind of hoping that people will do the right thing. The government has to set a clear lead. And I don't think politicians can be so cowardly as to say they'll never take on a difficult argument about building homes. These things the nettle has to be grasped if we're to tackle this crisis.
On like the wider social change that we're dealing with at the moment, do you think our kids' generation will aspire to be homeowners, or are we inevitably moving towards a rental society?
it feels like that's where it's heading, Bev, because obviously this generation, they don't expect to own a car. And I think many of them will say, well, they don't necessarily expect to own a home, certainly not until their 40s at the earliest. And if that's the reality, you've got to get more serious about holding landlords to account. You know, there are good landlords out there, and we believe our good landlord charter will give recognition to those people, but there are a lot of bad ones too, and they get away with a hell of a lot. And we really need to legislate to protect people who rent. And to be fair to Michael Gove, he has a bill that I think he wants to bring forward to do that. But we've got to get that right, because the reality for a lot of young people in Britain is, as you've just said, they'll be renting through their 20s, 30s, and maybe into their 40s.
But are you okay, Andy, with that vision of the future where people don't aspire to buy a house? Because that is a massive change. Traditionally, this country was about saving and getting on the property ladder, and that's security. So are you all right with a vision in which everybody is a renter? Because I think that leaves the next generation very vulnerable.
No, I'm not all right with it, Bev. I want to see more people able to own their own home. That's absolutely, as you say, a tradition that we've all grown up in. But my kind of critique is you can't have policies that are only about home ownership. We do have to do more to protect renters. We do have to do more to build more homes for social rent or council homes. You need all of these things in play if you're going to solve the housing crisis. And as far as I can see, we've talked about the housing crisis for years. When I was in Westminster, there was people always going on about it. I've never seen a plan come forward actually to tackle it. We're going to put forward a Greater Manchester plan to do precisely that at the housing conference here today. And I just hope Westminster will back us in bringing it forward.
Andy, I've seen you on the football pitch. As you know, it's not my favourite sport, football. I don't know what you like on cricket, but there's a big report today, which I'm sure you're aware of, about for equity in cricket, which effectively says English cricket is misogynistic and racist. And the English ladies cricket team, for instance, has never played at Lord's, while Eton and Harrow play there every year.
I wasn't actually a bad cricketer, Andrew, to be honest. I was a better cricketer than I was a footballer. I played for Lancashire schoolboys once or twice in my day, and I turned out at Old Trafford once or twice as well. So I love my cricket, actually. And I've always had a feeling that the game needs to get back into state schools. And I think that's one of the big things that's coming out of this report today. It really needs to do that. But in playing cricket in my youth, I definitely encountered some of those attitudes. I remember my dad going to Lancashire County Cricket Club to vote to let women be allowed in the pavilion. We used to have to sit with my mum in the women's pavilion when we used to go and watch in the old days. And in the end, after a few times of trying, that vote actually was carried. And to be fair, the club that I love up here, Lancashire County Cricket Club, has made massive changes. Actually, the club is unrecognisable from what it was when I was growing up. So I think there are signs of progress, but the sport definitely has to take this seriously. I think maybe more at club cricket, Andrew, you get some of these attitudes, and I just think any sport can't get a report like this and not be kind of shaken to its core. Really, it's got to do something. Cricket does have some of this discrimination echoing around the sport, and this is a moment absolutely to face up to it and root it out.
OK, all right. Andy Burnham.
Thanks for joining us, Andy.
Look after my hometown.
Nice
Look after my hometown. It looks like it's in very safe hands, and enjoy your housing festival.
It's in good shape, Bev. It's in good shape. We're doing a lot of good things.
Good to talk to you, Andy. Andy Burnham, who, in my view, if he was Labour leader, they would be 40 points ahead.
He will be. He will be Labour leader one day soon, I am sure. Now, still to come, we're going to be live to the COVID inquiry as former Health Secretary is expected to be grilled over pandemic preparedness. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel. First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken.
How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel. Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's Tuesday, June the 27th. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Now, former Health Secretary Matt Hancock is about to be, well, questioned at the COVID-19 inquiry as they continue to examine the UK's pandemic preparedness.
And in another televised address, or you could even say rant, Putin has vowed to track down the Wagner mutineers as he tries to reassert his crumbling authority.
And each migrant reported to Rwanda will cost you, the taxpayer, almost £170,000. Home Secretary Suella Braverman argues that doing nothing is not an option. She's right, isn't she? But is £170 a head worth it?
I think it is. And a damning report on cricket's attitude to ethnic minorities and women. The report's authors express shock that Eton and Harrow play at Lord's every year, but the England's women team have never played a test match at the spiritual home of English cricket. And Labour are bellyaching, of course, about the proposed cost, £169,000 per migrant. It will be cheaper, I suspect, in the long run. They've got to do it, haven't they?
They've got to do something. It begs the question, try to stop people getting on the boats in the first place so they're not landing here and then...
And we think we're going to get the verdict of the appeal court on Thursday as to whether the policy is legal, and it might be then we should just get on with it.
Yeah, there's a lot going on this morning. Don't go anywhere, will you? Let us know your thoughts. GBviews at gbnews.com. That live COVID inquiry with Matt Hancock in just a moment. But first of all, here is your news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thanks very much and good morning from the GB Newsroom at 4 minutes past 10. Matt Hancock has arrived to give evidence to the COVID-19 inquiry as hearings continue into the government's preparation for the pandemic. The former Health Secretary was one of the politicians who steered the coronavirus response before being forced to quit in June 2021. His appearance comes after the Chancellor, another former Health Secretary, said a narrowness of thinking failed to expand pandemic preparedness beyond planning for a flu outbreak. Food inflation has eased for a second month as supermarkets cut the price of household staples, according to figures. Shop price inflation overall slowed to 8.4% in June, down from 9% in May. Fresh food inflation decelerated for a second consecutive month to 14.6% in June, a relatively significant drop from May's 15.4%. The British Retail Consortium says if the current situation continues, it should drop to single digits later this year. Labour will force a vote in the House of Commons on their proposals to ease the mortgage crisis. It comes after last week's Bank of England interest rate hike. Labour's plan includes forcing banks to help struggling mortgage holders by allowing them to temporarily switch to interest-only payments or lengthen their mortgage period. New measures have been announced to tackle the non-consensual sharing of intimate images online. Amendments to the Online Safety Bill will remove the need to prove intent to cause distress, making it easier to charge and convict offenders. Those found guilty could face up to 6 months in jail, and if the intent to distress is proven, a maximum of 2 years in custody. Justice Secretary Alex Chalk says he wants to bring more protection to women and girls.
We are overhauling the law so that there is nowhere to hide for cowards and bitter ex-partners who cause enormous damage by sharing intimate images without consent. So there already was an offence from as long ago as 2015, and in fact, we led many other countries in doing so, but we now want to go that step further, so there is nowhere to hide. Whatever the motivation was, whatever they were intending, whatever excuse they tried to come up with, the key issue is how has it affected that individual? Did they consent to it? No.
The government has been urged to rule out detaining or forcibly removing children to Rwanda whose families are seeking asylum in the UK. The Women and Equalities Committee says the risks of harm to asylum-seeking children outweigh any risk of damaging the government's aim of deterrence through its illegal migration bill. The Home Office says that ministers could spend £169,000 on each person forcibly removed. The committee's chair, Caroline Noakes, says a detention centre is no place for children.
The committee was very concerned that whilst the government has put a stay on the removal of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children to Rwanda, there is no such position in place for children with their families. So very young children who we have seen images of them coming over, making terrible, terrible crossings on boats, could be put in detention centres. Now look, effectively, a detention camp is no place for a child.
A jet linked to Wagner Group founder Yevgeny Prigozhin has arrived in Belarus from Russia. Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko offered the leader relocation to the country in a deal to end the rebellion launched on Saturday. This morning, Russia conducted fighter jet drills over the Baltic Sea. This comes after President Putin paid tribute to the Russian pilots who were killed fighting the Wagner Group during this weekend's mutiny. Ukraine politician Kira Rudik says the weekend's mayhem is beneficial to the Ukrainian forces.
Every distraction that Russians have out of the front is a good chance for us to push forward on a counteroffensive. And of course, the destabilization of situation in Russia is something that would allow us to move forward.
Well, meanwhile, the Ministry of Defence reports that Ukrainian forces have made advances near Donetsk city. The MOD says it's highly likely they have recaptured an area of territory occupied by Russia since 2014. Racism, sexism and elitism are widespread in English and Welsh cricket, according to a damning report. The ICEC collected evidence from more than 4,000 people and found that racism remains entrenched in the sport and that women routinely encounter sexism and misogyny. The ICEC has made 44 recommendations for the England and Wales Cricket Board. The chair of the ECB, Richard Thompson, has apologised and has called for a reset in the game. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Let's turn to the COVID inquiry now, where former Health Secretary Matt Hancock is being questioned.
Clear my responsibility as the Tier 1 national responder for a pandemic flu and for other infectious diseases. I was already aware of this element of the role from my time at the Cabinet Office, but nevertheless it was properly and formally brought to my attention. And on day one, I asked for more information on preparedness because having been involved in previous crises, for instance, at the Bank of England before I went into politics, I knew that when things go wrong, things move quickly, and you need to be as well prepared as you can.
At the highest level of the department, was there a board known as the Departmental Board, which looked at the highest level on the major risks confronting the department?
Yes, and the role of the departmental board was to ensure that the department was structuring itself properly to deal with the different challenges that it faced.
May we have, please, 23142, which is a copy of your department's then high-level risk register for Q3 2019 to 20. If you can go to the top of the page, we will see there the years 2019-20, Q3, high-level risk register. And if you go to the far left-hand side of the page, there will be a number of row numbers. If you could scroll down, please, to row 11. There are two names in the left, in the column second from the left, Mr. Hancock, Emma Reid and Clara Swinson, both of whom have been witnesses before this inquiry. The description, major national infectious disease outbreak and pandemic flu, and the risk identified for self-evident reasons is that the department fails to respond and mobilise adequately to a major national infectious disease hazard, such as pandemic flu or other novel infection. And the approach taken, the response on the part of the department, is in the next column, to manage the risk and likely domestic impact of a major pandemic flu or emerging infectious disease outbreak. So the risk was identified in terms not just of the pandemic being an influenza pandemic, but obviously the risk of an infectious disease outbreak, an emerging infectious disease outbreak.
Yes.
Does its presence in that chart, in that schedule, Mr. Hancock, indicate the seriousness with which the department took the risk of a major infectious disease outbreak or pandemic flu?
Yes, and the red rating demonstrates that the significance of the impact of this, should it strike, could be very serious. And the day-to-day life of a health secretary involves being aware of and from time to time being involved in managing the response to potential infectious disease risks, which happen from time to time. And I set out in my statement that over the autumn of 2019, there was a potential flu outbreak. There was a what's now known as Mpox outbreak, then known as monkeypox. And over this period, we were also dealing with the Ebola epidemic in West and Central Africa. And the particular responsibility of the health department was to ensure that we were prepared should Ebola come to the UK. So this was not a theoretical exercise. It was part of the day-to-day job of being health secretary.
It is apparent from the document that in relation to each risk identified on the left of the schedule, a number of what's known as mitigations are put in place in order to manage the risk. In other words, the department sets out in columns K, L, M and N in respect of each risk what the department is doing to manage the risk, to mitigate it, to ensure either that the risk does not eventuate, it does not come to pass, or to manage the consequences of whatever it is that the risk amounts to, what it brings about and how the consequences can be managed. Do you happen to know why, in this risk register, there is no mitigation set out in respect of that row 11 risk?
No, I don't know why those boxes are empty, but I do know that there was significant activity underway both in the department and in Public Health England to make sure that we were prepared as then thought possible. Now, I'll come on to that because it's absolutely central, that question. And frankly, it was a regular occurrence to deal with these sorts of novel infectious diseases and threats. So it was something that happened all the time.
Do you recall, Mr. Hancock, any particular departmental board, which presumably you attended, at which the row 11 risk of a major national infectious disease and pandemic flu was actively debated?
No.
Do you have any recollection of the debates surrounding this particular risk at departmental boards? I mean, obviously a great deal, many points go across the Secretary of State's desk, but do you have any personal recollection of...
I don't at the departmental board, but I also wouldn't have expected it to be debated at the departmental board because the departmental board was focused on ensuring that there was appropriate resource in place for any of the different risks that the department faced, and ensuring that the department was set up to respond, not to do the responding itself. It's an important distinction in terms of how the board operated and what its job was. I was aware from the day one brief onwards of the work that was underway. So there's no substantive reason these boxes should be empty, and I think it would be wrong to read from this, which I don't recall myself, this implying that there wasn't work ongoing, because as you can see from the other paperwork, there was.
My question was, in fact,
so
to ask you
that's
whether you recollect
Matt Hancock, the former Health Secretary, being questioned by Hugo Keith KC, who is the lead counsel for the COVID-19 inquiry. This is not about care homes and having the protective arm around care homes, which of course he said the government had done. It's about the preparedness for the pandemic. And of course, this will run throughout the day. It's going to run for another 3 or even 4 years.
Can you imagine being Baroness Hallett and having to sit in that chair for 3 or 4 years with the pace of that procedure? Look, I'm interested in this topic. That was boring. We can't lie. There are questions that need asking, but I'm just not sure they're going to be the right questions. Let's talk to Molly Kingsley now, founder of Us For Them, and see what she thinks. Morning, Molly.
Morning, Bev.
Does your
Morning,
blood boil in the same way that mine does as I sit there looking at taxpayers' money just being burnt in the corner while they all waffle around the issues?
Yeah, well, they waffle around the issues and they ask the wrong questions. So I think we saw this yesterday. So yesterday there was a lady called Emma Reid. She was Director of Pandemic Preparedness at DHSC. So, you know, potentially a very important witness. And what was really obvious, and I only listened to about an hour and a half of it, it's all like tape, but you know, what was very obvious is that there was a particular slant from Hugo Keith, the inquiry KC, on the questioning. And that slant was, you know, as it sounded actually from that short clip then, was beginning to be the case with Hancock, looking very narrowly at the plans and, you know, obviously examining what the plans were and what preparation had been put in place is very legitimate. But this very narrow kind of slant to the questioning, which is really focused on why was more not done. So, one of the questions yesterday was expressly, and I'm quoting here, was there any debate about the possibility of border closures, mass quarantine, isolations, and mandatory quarantine? And actually, I think what many of us would say we've learned over the last 3 years is that each of those policies was to a greater or lesser extent a disaster. So we're not asking the right question, which is, were these interventions appropriate? Were they evidence-based? And what was the cost of them? And I've not yet heard one mention of that.
Molly, remind us what your group does and why you set it up.
Yeah, of course. So we are a group called Us for Them. We are a group of largely parents, but actually also grandparents, teachers, psychologists, other experts who really formed at the beginning of the pandemic, just out of a concern that the interventions and school closures at that point in particular were really damaging for children. And we formed at a point, I think it's fair to say, when no one was really saying that. Obviously it's become very trendy now to say that. We've had lots of people jump on our bandwagon. And, to an extent, that is great. But I do think we also need to be clear that there were a few of us saying this from the beginning. And it wasn't just Us for Them. It was Us for Them. It was also the Children's Commissioner was very clear about the negative implications for many children of school closures. There were people like Professor Ellen Townsend. She was a great voice throughout, saying, really, where is the proportionality in some of these measures? And I think, really the 3 hours this morning ought to be such a great opportunity for Hancock to be asked some of these key questions. So, what about proportionality? What about reasonableness? What about the pandemic plans, which set out many of these principles? But I would be surprised if we hear that line of questioning from the inquiry based on what we've seen so far.
I mean, if it wasn't for you, Molly, and Us for Them, there would be no consideration of the impact on children and young people from this inquiry, because the terms of reference initially didn't even include that as a factor, did they?
No, they didn't. They didn't mention the word children. They did mention once, I think. I know, it's incredible, isn't it? Because, there's 10 million children in this country. So on that basis alone, you would expect them to be included. And I think the thing that makes it really shocking is that I think many of us believe that children were the cohort most disproportionately impacted by not only school closures, actually, but lockdown as well, and some of the other mitigations. So I think, to think that the inquiry wouldn't have addressed that, and, where we are now with the inquiry is far from perfect. So there is now, as a result of our campaigning and the campaigning of others, there is a specific module on children, but at the very earliest, that will be sometime towards the back end of next year, probably more likely 2025. It is far too late. I think a really important point here is that the module 2, which in some ways, first of all, there's no one representing children in module 1, pandemic preparedness. That is very odd, because how on earth can you talk about being prepared for a pandemic if you're not also talking about how do we keep children's lives going? How do we keep schools open? Seems the inquiry is not interested in that argument. There is no one representing children, and we did apply, others applied too for module 1. For module 2, there is a consortium representing children, which is great. It's fair to say they were far less of an awkward squad than, Us for Them and the people we applied to module 2 with. So we'll see how that translates, but at least there is a voice in module 2. And module 2 is the key decision-making module, but the children's specific module isn't going to be for another 2 or 3 years, which I just think is unbelievable.
And Molly, who said no to having children represented in this first stage? I mean, who makes that decision? Is it a minister? Is it the KC who's standing up speaking now? Lady Hallett?
No, I think it was directly Hallett. So we had a letter back from Lady Hallett, and a bit of context here, Andrew, is that it wasn't just Us for Them applying. So Us for Them, and this is public, so I'm sure I can say it, but Us for Them together with a consortium applied for module 1 and module 2. That consortium actually included Anne Longfield, who was the Children's Commissioner at the time of the pandemic, and we were refused for both those modules, which we thought was quite surprising, because there were about 8 of us, 8 organisations and individuals, each of whom had a real stake in the 3 preceding years. When we had the letter back from Module 1, and I looked at it last night because I thought this might come up, it was effectively because it was outside the remit of Module 1. So it wasn't anything personal about us. It was because Module 1 was about pandemic preparedness, not children, effectively. And I just find that incredible. And I think it speaks to the very problem that we have seen throughout the 3 years, that children have been consistently overlooked and deprioritized. I mean, there was a study that came out yesterday saying that. We don't need a study to tell us that. It's been absolutely obvious from day one of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Molly. Keep up the good work.
I'm sure we talked to Molly quite a lot during this. Because we've got another 4 years of this, Molly, so I'm sure we'll be talking to you again. And
I will look forward to it.
Yeah, fight the good fight. That's Molly Kingsley from, what's her group called? Us for Them.
And also, I think the government are asking for your stories. There is an advert, you might have heard it on the radio, saying, tell us your stories of the COVID pandemic. They want to factor this into the inquiry.
I think there's no doubt kids were the biggest loser. University,
No
schools,
doubt.
stuck at home. And while I sometimes despair people going about mental illness, there is no doubt that some kids stuck at home without seeing their mates, maybe in a tower block with no garden, can't go out the door.
Isolated.
It wasn't good for their mental health. Now, we're going to head back to Manchester as they house Europe's biggest housing festival. We spoke earlier, of course, to the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, People's Channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know,
All
Kate
sorts
Moss?
of Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10:30, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
We're going to go straight back to that housing conference in Manchester with our very own business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, morning.
Morning, Andrew. Morning, Bev. This is Housing 2023. We're in the Central Exchange in Manchester, this wonderful Victorian building which harks back to Manchester's glorious Victorian industrial past. There are thousands of delegates here from all across the housing sector, and I'm joined, Andrew and Bev, by Gavin Smart. He is the Chief Executive of the Chartered Institute of Housing. Gavin, this is your conference. You've spent 30 years, I think. You're looking well in the housing industry. Your organisation covers local authorities, developers, builders, pretty much the whole of the housing industry. Look, housing is rocketing up the political agenda. People are worried about their mortgages. Is there a fundamental shortage of homes in the UK?
So we think there is a fundamental shortage of homes in the UK. A lot of the problems that you can see in the UK housing market, I think we would say, are down to long-term inability to build the numbers of homes that we needed. And we haven't really done that for 35, 40 years or more. And that problem has been storing up over time and getting bigger over time.
And that is really aggravating affordability issues, right?
Yeah. So supply and demand, the less something there is, the more money chasing it, the more expensive it gets. We have real problems with supply driving big problems with affordability, and of course that impacts most particularly on people who are on lower incomes, working households on modest means, who find themselves locked out of not only home ownership but increasingly struggling now with the level of private rents as well.
Andy Burnham told GB News earlier there is a full-scale housing crisis in this country. Yesterday in the House of Commons, Jeremy Hunt unveiled that new charter he's got with the mortgage providers. What did you think of it?
So I think the charter's a helpful step because what it shows is the government and the mortgage providers understanding that we're about to go through an incredible squeeze, and it is going to need forbearance and understanding and flexibility on behalf of the mortgage lenders to try to get us through that. But we are facing an extraordinary rapid rise in borrowing rates, and that's going to cause real pain and real hardship for existing homeowners who are having to remortgage, and it's going to cause further problems for people who are trying to buy their first home, who are going to find that increasingly unaffordable.
And how about the shortage of social housing, what we used to call council housing, Gavin? We haven't built council houses on a proper scale for years, for decades. Governments of both the main parties.
We have failed to build enough sufficiently affordable housing, what I would call social rented housing, and that has always been a part of the solution when we have built the numbers of homes that we need to meet our needs as a nation. Often a third or more of the homes that we built have been homes at social rent for those people for whom the private market and private ownership is out of reach.
So we do need more social housing, more council housing. How can we unlock that? Many of your members are housing associations. They manage a lot of those social homes, don't they? And because we're not building council houses, social housing, the government's spending 25, 30 billion pounds a year on housing benefit.
So we do need to look at how we unlock additional government investment to go alongside the investment that these organisations themselves make in new homes to drive up the numbers of new homes that we're building. Because you're right that we have had a view that, well, we can manage by meeting the running cost bill, the housing benefit bill, but in practice that bill has ballooned, it's getting bigger all of the time, and it's government spending money for no return as well.
Gavin, well, thank you for welcoming GB News to this conference. It's great to be here. We'll be broadcasting from here all day. There you have it, Andrew and Bev. This is not just about home ownership at all. That's not only where the housing crisis is. We also have a big issue in this country of affordable housing, and for people at the sharp end, social housing too. Back to you.
That's Liam Halligan saying we will be back to that major conference on housing in Manchester. Now, still to come, every migrant deported to Rwanda will cost you, the taxpayer, almost £170,000. But why? Find out after your morning news with Tamsin.
Andrew, thank you. Here are the headlines at 10:34. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has told the COVID-19 inquiry that he took his role as principal responder to a pandemic very seriously. His appearance comes after Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, another former Health Secretary, said a narrowness of thinking failed to expand pandemic preparedness beyond planning for a flu outbreak. Matt Hancock was one of the politicians who steered the coronavirus response before being forced to quit in June 2021. Senior executives from Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's and Morrisons are to be questioned by MPs today over rising food prices when wholesale prices are dropping. Food inflation has eased for a second month as supermarkets cut the price of household staples. Figures from the British Retail Consortium show that shop price inflation overall slowed to 8.4% in June, down from 9% in May. It says if the current situation continues, it should drop to single digits later this year. Labour will force a vote in the House of Commons on their proposals to ease the mortgage crisis. It comes after the Bank of England raised interest rates last week. Labour's plan includes forcing banks to help mortgage holders struggling with payments by allowing them to temporarily switch to interest-only payments or to lengthen their mortgage period. New measures have been announced to tackle the non-consensual sharing of intimate images online. Amendments to the Online Safety Bill will remove the need to prove intent to cause distress, making it easier to charge and convict offenders. Those found guilty could face up to 6 months in jail, and if the intent to distress is proven, a maximum of 2 years in custody. The government is being urged to rule out detaining or forcibly removing children to Rwanda whose families are seeking asylum in the UK. The Women and Equalities Committee says the risks of harm to asylum-seeking children outweigh any risk of damage to the government's aim of deterrence through its illegal migration bill. The Home Office says ministers could spend £169,000 on each person forcibly removed. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2726 and €1.1641. The price of gold is £1,513.28 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,454 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel. Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:40. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearson and Bev Turner.
Now, sending a single illegal migrant to Rwanda or another safe country could cost you, the taxpayer, £169,000 each. That's according to analysis from our very own Home Office.
So judges will make a decision about the Rwanda policy this Thursday as the government battles to stop the boats. Let's get more analysis from our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Good morning, Darren. How has this figure of £169,000 per head been arrived at?
Yeah, very good morning, Bev and Andrew. This comes from the Home Office. Every time a policy is announced, it is up to civil servants, not to ministers, to work out just what is the public value in it, what potentially it could cost the taxpayer, and under freedom of information, transparency rules, if you like, the Home Office has had to publish that figure. And what is involved, clearly, the UK has been already sent quite a large number of money, millions of pounds to Rwanda, even though the scheme is not taken off. And they will continue to do so if the scheme clearly does get the go-ahead. As you say, it is somewhat wrangled in the court system at the moment. So £169,000, that's what those internal documents show it would cost the taxpayer. Now, the most controversial bit of that, I mean, that's a hell of a lot of money to begin with, is the very fact that it is substantially higher than if those asylum seekers stayed in the UK. In fact, it would cost £106,000 a year to house people here in the UK as they sort through the asylum system. So many people, not least of all the opposition, are suggesting this policy does not make any sense at all. In fact, Labour today have called it somewhat of a joke and say that the government is totally clueless about the ultimate bill. Now, from the government's point of view, they turn around and say, hold on a second, yes, it may well cost more money in the short term if this scheme goes ahead, but the whole point of this scheme is to deter people from coming here in the first place. And so if you reduce the numbers dramatically, actually it will, in the end, save the taxpayer money. The big question is, though, of course, A, will the Rwanda policy literally take off at any stage? And B, if it does, will it act as a deterrent? I mean, logically, you might well say it will, but there's actually little evidence thus far that it would. So it's quite difficult for the Home Office, all of this. And ultimately, it's very difficult for the Prime Minister because he's made stopping the boats one of his 5 pledges. And far from stopping the boats, the numbers of people arriving this month is higher than it was this time last year.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you so much, Darren McCaffrey there down at Westminster. Our guests are here with us to go through some of the top stories of the day. Senior political commentator at GB News, Nigel Nelson, and political commentator Tonya Buxton are here. Let's just back reference what Darren was talking about there.
Because we know what he thinks.
Yeah, well...
We know what Nigel Nelson thinks.
You do indeed. I think the whole thing is
a gimmick.
It's a gimmick that won't work. We'll see on Thursday whether the flights ever take off when the appeal court decides if they can do. But I just don't see how it can work. And there's a lot of contradictions thrown in. There's Suella Braverman who goes over there and says, oh, the decor there is so wonderful, I'd like it in my house. Well, if Rwanda's so great, where is the deterrent value of actually sending people there?
Because they won't be living here, getting our benefits and living in the land of...
Yeah, well, only about 200 of them. It's not going to make an awful lot of difference.
At the moment, it's a deterrent, Nigel.
Well, but is it a deterrent?
I think it will be.
It's a very expensive one. Will people who are crossing the Channel know all about this?
Yes.
Why?
Because it would be... well, I would leaflet them. I would get a plane over the... where the migrants are in Calais and leaflet.
Where would you find them to catch you, give them the leaflets?
Well, they're all there. We know where they are.
What, in the Calais camps?
Yeah.
You know, I was down in Devon the other day and there was a friend of mine who is actually looking after somebody at the moment who is a refugee who's arrived here. I can't remember which country that he came from. And he said that he was telling my friend that him and his friends were all in tears because they'd heard about the Rwanda plan. And they were desperately crying about the fact that they were going to get on the boat, but they thought they were going to go to Rwanda. And that, for me, that was like a first-hand primary source. Yeah. That people who want to come here don't want to go to Rwanda.
So where would they have gone then? If they're in Calais, they hear about this and decide not to come here, where do they then go?
Presumably stay in France.
Stay in France. It's a safe country.
Yeah, it's a safe country.
No conflict.
It's a safe country, but until we've got a returns agreement with them, we can't send people back from here.
Well, they can stay in France.
Well, I'm not sure that the French want them any more than we do.
Well, but don't the laws of asylum mean they should stay where they set foot first?
Well, if they're worried about their mortality, you know, they're so frightened that they're running out of their countries. And I mean, I don't understand why they can't stay in France. The problem is with the human rights lawyers.
Yeah.
You know, they're getting phenomenal amounts of money. It's our tax money,
Don't forget legal aid, Tonya.
So I really think that should be tightened up, that you can't just get legal aid to stay in this country on a whim, which is what it looks like a lot of the time. You know, Rwanda is... It wouldn't be the first thing that jumped to my mind if I was thinking of how to get rid of the immigrants. I definitely am one for kind of getting one of these cruise ships, putting it way out of our waters and putting everyone on there and then taking them away from there.
Yeah.
But as this is in action, I think it's a great deterrent and we have to stick to it. We have to stick to it.
We've got to try something, Nigel.
Well, I agree with that, but I mean, but why don't we try something that actually works? So
you don't know if it's going to work.
Well, no. In fairness, that's true. Until we actually see the things start happening. But you're only talking
give
about
it a chance.
But either way, you're only talking about 200 people at the moment. That's the original deal we've got with Rwanda. So it's not going to make a huge difference to the figures.
It'll be totemic when that first flight takes off to Rwanda.
Well, it'll certainly be that. But I mean, more importantly, is to try and get returns agreements, to try and change the asylum system so people can apply for asylum not in this country, they can apply elsewhere, and also to have proper settlement schemes that actually work. At the moment, we don't have those schemes. So that would actually deter people from crossing the Channel much more than the risk of going to this wonderful decor place in Rwanda.
Well, OK.
It's going to roll.
We're not going to stop this one, are we? It's going to roll. Tonya, this is an initiative driven by Conservative MP Miriam Cates, friend of the show. Good morning, Miriam, if you're watching. Sex education plans, material to be made, should be made visible to parents who want to see them. What's shocking is at the moment they aren't.
That is what is most shocking. You know, the parents aren't aware of what their children are being taught. We don't live in deep state. We are not a communist country. We are a democracy. And our children are our responsibility. I am the person that is responsible for my children. So I need to know what they're being educated. And if I disagree with that education, I should have a say in it. It shouldn't just be hidden from me.
Do you trust the teachers? Because I wouldn't if I was a parent.
Well, the thing is I've had some run-ins with my son's now leaving that school, so I'm happy to say it, with the school. I've had to really come in really heavy. And, you know, I use the fact that I'm a journalist. I dangle it over them, saying, if you continue this will make a very interesting story for my channel, make a very interesting story for the newspapers I work with.
And this is because you feel they've stepped over that line.
They've stepped over that line.
Of parent and teacher.
Can I just take this story a little bit further? So, I think what Miriam's doing is absolutely amazing, and I applaud her. But also now there was a letter written to Gillian Keegan, our Education Secretary, by two 14-year-old girls who said that they are frightened to speak up in class and say there are only two sexes. So that's the situation we're in now. You know, the schools are teaching something as dogma, which is some weird fantasy, and kids are afraid to actually speak up. I know that one of my sons was saying that, you know, when they start having these conversations about gender and stuff, he pops in his earpods and just zones out. He doesn't want to get into a confrontation with the teachers. It's not his row to argue about. He doesn't want to, but he thinks it's absolute rubbish.
And of course, we've just had the row about the pupil being shouted at by the teacher over her refusal to accept one of her little girl colleagues was a cat.
Yes, and the teacher called the student despicable.
She did.
But those students were actually fighting back, though, weren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought that what was impressive about that was that they really did want to have a debate on it. And I agree parents should know what their children are being taught. I don't think they should have a veto over it, but certainly they should be informed about what is going on. Obviously, because we talk about transgender issues so much, it's bound to actually come into the classroom, and I think teachers do need to have a position on that, which is what this government guidance that is coming up this summer at some point should actually do.
So the argument with the people who provide the educational literature is that they can't make it public because it's copyrighted effectively, and if it was public and it was all over the internet, then people could steal their material, and similarly, these are lesson plans that they've come up with. That's the argument, of course.
It's rubbish. Having been a teacher, that's just rubbish.
But what about, OK, well, let me put it this way, what about if you've got a very religious school who don't want to teach that homosexuality is OK, and they say, I don't want you telling my children that homosexuality is OK, because that will be on the curriculum, that will be partly on the agenda.
We go into Section 28 then, don't we?
Yeah, thank you. We have a Section 28 for that. So that's already in law, it's all legal, and it's, you know, and... you know, if you have just a modicum of common sense, can we just come back to thinking like normal people instead of these freakish thinking? There are men, there are women that are attracted to women, there are men that are attracted to men, and that is a fact. You know, it's not a magical thing. We're not magically saying that you're changing who you are born as. You're just talking about where your sexual preference is. And that's a big difference to saying, I'm a man, look at me, I'm a man. It's not going to work that way. Just come back to common sense. And can I just firstly say that I grew up with a transgender woman who was fantastic, and I saw what she went through in the 80s. I saw her struggle and what she suffered to go through. She's no longer around, sadly, but I know her, and she would be devastated by this conversation. She would be devastated by it because she really suffered to get to where she was. This flippancy, this kind of like, oh, yes, it's just genders, don't worry about it, it's nothing, it's not a big deal. It's wrong.
Yeah, and how many genders are we up to now? Is it 88?
300 and something, isn't it?
Is it 300 something?
Nigel, let's move on. We've been at the Manchester House Festival this morning, the Housing Festival, and this is the story, of course, about mortgage costs rising. I mean, this is eye-watering for most people. These figures are life-changing.
The figures are terrifying. Yeah, I mean, broadly, what the figures are saying is that if you were to take a fixed-rate mortgage out now, you'll be paying $23,000 more in interest than you would have done if you'd done the same thing in 2018, which is a phenomenal amount.
That's over 5 years.
That's over 5 years, say a 5-year fixed rate. I mean, the issue at the moment is how do you get inflation down without putting interest rates up, which has the knock-on effect on mortgages?
And it's interesting, Nigel, that Labour obviously criticised the government about the cost of living crisis, but they're not criticising the interest rates going up.
No, but I don't think... because at the moment there's no alternative.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're going to control inflation, if you accept that inflation is the one thing that needs to be dealt with and brought down, the only way you can do that is with interest rates, or you do other unpopular things to take money out of the economy, like tax rises.
You take the green taxes out of people's energy bills. That would put money in people's pockets and cut inflation dramatically.
Yeah, but we don't want to actually give people more money, otherwise inflation keeps going up.
But that's not the case, though. It's not spending inflation. It's not because we've suddenly got loads of
that would
money.
enable them to pay their mortgage.
Yes, exactly. It's not the kind of thing, oh, look, we're all shopping so much, we've got so much money. That's not the case. We are in this situation because of what happened during lockdown. I'll say it again. We are in this situation because of what happened during lockdown.
We gave away too much
Printing of money to people that was to make people stay at home, not to work, all the faulty schemes. I mean, my husband's within construction, and he knows of businesses that formed just to get the grant and then have left the country.
And
so
billions from furlough missing and never been restored to the taxpayer.
PPEs, all the mistakes that were made. That's why we're in this situation. So it's not a spending situation.
No.
So the government does need to step in and cut all the other expenses that we're getting in our lives. But they don't want to because it's making
it's
too much
partly
money.
true, but not totally true. I mean, there are other factors as well. I mean, the war in Ukraine quite clearly. And as far as the lockdown bit of COVID disrupting supply chains has put costs up.
Right. Before we start our own COVID inquiry that is going on at the moment, we've got to move on. In the next few moments, we're going to be speaking to Roland Butcher. He was one of the first black cricketers to play for England. We're going to be talking about this damning new report into racism in the English cricket world. More to come on that in the next hour.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A bright start for some out there this morning, but generally quite a cloudy day, rain across parts of the north. Much of the south will stay dry thanks to this area of high pressure, but it's being squeezed away thanks to this area of low pressure that's already bringing outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland and will continue to trickle its way eastwards through the day. So turning damp over parts of Wales and northern England at the moment. The rain will be on and off here through the day. The rain will spread into northeastern Scotland eventually after some early brightness, and a bright start to the day across East Anglia and the southeast, but it will cloud over here as we go through the day. Much of the south of England will stay dry, but staying fairly damp across southern Scotland. The rain may ease a touch in Belfast, allowing temperatures to rise to 21 Celsius. Generally in the high teens, where it's dull and damp further south, even though it's cloudy, we should get temperatures into the low 20s. Quite a misty, murky night to come tonight as well, particularly around western coasts. Further outbreaks of rain across eastern England and Scotland, but should tend to ease as we go through the second half of the night. So many places will become dry as we head into Wednesday. It will be a pretty warm night, however, so warmer than the night just gone, with temperatures holding up in the mid or even high teens in some locations. So a humid start to Wednesday. As I said, many places will start dry, but tomorrow morning, fairly quickly, I think we'll see some outbreaks of rain pushing back into Northern Ireland, and this line of rain could have some pretty heavy bursts mixed in as it comes across parts of Scotland, then into England and Wales later on. Now, most of the day across central and eastern England looks dry, and it should turn drier to the northwest and a little fresher here. But for England and Wales, quite a warm, humid feeling day with temperatures once more in the southeast, 25, maybe 26 Celsius. That humidity may spark some heavy thundery showers on this weather front before it clears through during Thursday, and the weather remaining pretty changeable with more low pressure systems coming in this week.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, All you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
Now, a damning report on cricket's attitude to ethnic minorities and women. We'll be speaking to one of the first black cricketers to play for England about this report.
And former Health Secretary Matt Hancock, he's being interviewed this morning at the COVID-19 inquiry. They're continuing to examine the UK's pandemic preparedness. We will bring you the latest headlines from that.
And another televised address or mad raving from Vladimir Putin. He's vowed to track down the Wagner mutineers. He's trying to reassert his crumbling authority in Russia.
I've been watching some of the Hancock COVID-19 inquiry while we were on the break.
Yeah. Doesn't like talking about his emotions, apparently. Did you
Oh.
watch him in the jungle? He emoted all the way through. Is how he managed to stay in there for so long.
My blood is boiling. You don't want to miss what he has had to say so far. But first of all, here is your news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thank you, and good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 11. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has said he is profoundly sorry for each death caused by COVID-19 as he gives evidence to the pandemic inquiry. The former Health Secretary was one of the politicians who steered the coronavirus response before being forced to quit in June 2021. His appearance comes after Chancellor Jeremy Hunt said a narrowness of thinking failed to expand pandemic preparedness beyond planning for a flu outbreak. Matt Hancock has told the inquiry he thought the UK was more prepared.
The UK was one of the best placed countries in the world for responding to a pandemic, and indeed in some areas categorised by the World Health Organization as the best placed in the world. And you can understand that when you're assured by the leading global authority that the UK is the best prepared in the world, that is quite a significant reassurance. That turned out to be wrong.
Senior executives from Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's and Morrisons are to be questioned by MPs over rising food prices. Food inflation has eased for a second month as supermarkets cut the price of some household staples, including milk, cheese and eggs. Figures from the British Retail Consortium show that shop price inflation overall slowed to 8.4% in June, down from 9% in May. The British Retail Consortium says if the current situation continues, it should drop to single digits later this year. New measures have been announced to tackle the non-consensual sharing of intimate images online. Amendments to the Online Safety Bill will remove the need to prove intent to cause distress, making it easier to charge and convict offenders. Those found guilty could face up to 6 months in jail And if the intent to distress is proven, a maximum of 2 years in custody. Justice Secretary Alex Chalk says he wants to bring more protection to women and girls.
We are overhauling the law so that there is nowhere to hide for cowards and bitter ex-partners who cause enormous damage by sharing intimate images without consent. So there already was an offence from as long ago as 2015, and in fact, we led many other countries in doing so, but we now want to go that step further, so there is nowhere to hide. Whatever the motivation was, whatever they were intending, whatever excuse they tried to come up with, the key issue is how has it affected that individual? Did they consent to it? No.
The government has been urged to rule out detaining or forcibly removing children to Rwanda whose families are seeking asylum in the UK. The Women and Equalities Committee says the risks of harm to asylum-seeking children outweigh any risk of damaging the government's aim of deterrence through its illegal migration bill. The Home Office says that ministers could spend £169,000 on each person forcibly removed. The committee's chair, Caroline Noakes, says a detention centre is no place for children.
The committee was very concerned that whilst the government has put a stay on the removal of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children to Rwanda, there is no such position in place for children with their families. So very young children who we have seen images of them coming over, making terrible, terrible crossings on boats, could be put in detention centres. Now look, effectively, a detention camp is no place for a child.
A jet linked to Wagner Group founder Yevgeny Prigozhin has arrived in Belarus from Russia. Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko offered the leader relocation to the country in a deal to end the rebellion launched on Saturday. This morning, Russia conducted fighter jet drills over the Baltic Sea. This comes after President Putin paid tribute to the Russian pilots who were killed fighting the Wagner Group during this weekend mutiny. Ukraine politician Kira Rudik says the weekend's mayhem is beneficial to the Ukrainian forces.
Every distraction that Russians have out of the front is a good chance for us to push forward on a counteroffensive. And of course, the destabilization of situation in Russia is something that would allow us to move forward.
The Ministry of Defence, meanwhile, reports that Ukrainian forces have made advances near Donetsk city. The MOD says it's highly likely they have recaptured an area of territory occupied by Russia since 2014. Racism, sexism and elitism are widespread in English and Welsh cricket, according to a damning report. The Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket collected evidence from more than 4,000 people and found that racism remains entrenched in the sport and that women routinely encounter sexism and misogyny. The ICEC has made 44 recommendations for the England and Wales Cricket Board. The chair of the ECB, Richard Thompson, has apologised and has called for a reset in the game. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Thanks for joining us this morning. Is it Tuesday?
Certainly is.
Only Tuesday, right. As a report, it could not be more damning. The Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket has concluded racism, sexism, classism and elitism, a lot of isms, are widespread in English and Welsh cricket.
So it was a 2-year investigation. It took evidence from 4,000 people. It was set up in the wake of the killing of George Floyd in 2021. Meanwhile, the chairman of the Cricket Board has issued an unreserved apology. So joining us now is the brilliant cricketer Roland Butcher, a man of history, of course, one of the first black cricketers to play for England. Roland, good morning to you. I suspect the findings of this commission don't surprise you, particularly with regard to race.
Yes, good morning. And yes, it certainly doesn't surprise me, and it wouldn't surprise any ethnic or female cricketer, recreational or professional, who's played the game. It's something that they have been saying for a long, long time. The only problem really is why it's taken so long, really, for a report like this to be brought out and then to be acted upon.
Is it because it's a white old boys network, Roland, effectively run the game?
Very much so. I mean, it always has been the case. I think a lot of things have been ignored over the years, but I think cricket is only part of what is going on in society. We have ignored for a very long time what people have had to say in relation to the hardships, etc., that they've had to go through. And I think that really is a failure of not just the cricket authorities, but I think our leaders in general. And I think there's a crisis of leadership really in the world that, some leaders see what's immediately in front of them. The best leaders see the future. I think certainly in cricketing point of view, over the years, I think most of our leaders have only seen what's just in front of them.
Roland, you were one of the first black cricketers to play for England, as we said. You were breaking down those barriers and those stereotypes and the discrimination. How was it then and how is it different now? Because there have certainly been improvements.
What I would say is that we certainly haven't learned from those days. Certainly back in the days when I played for Middlesex in the 80s and 90s, if you think back to the Middlesex side captained by Mike Braley, it is perhaps even to this day the most diverse and inclusive cricket team that's ever played. Middlesex had 5 black players. We had players from South Africa, Pakistan. We had players from different walks of life, Cambridge University, local, London. I mean, it was so diverse. Now, really, that was the blueprint. And that team was very, very successful. So we've really learned nothing from that. And here we are now 50-odd years down the line, and we've still got the same problem that we've now got to start and try and address once more.
On a personal level, Roland, because this report says the vast majority of non-white cricketers surveyed had experienced discrimination. Did you personally suffer discrimination?
Well, I mean, I would have suffered subtle discrimination. I perhaps didn't suffer as much as persons who lived most of their life in England. I came to England when I was 13 and a half and really had never encountered racism before because it didn't exist in the Caribbean. So, I really got into it late. I think the people who were here from a very young age, it became very much part and parcel of their everyday life. And to some degree, they just found a way to live with it. So I didn't have as much as the other players, for sure.
What's the answer? Because this report says that racism, class-based discrimination, elitism and sexism are baked in to English cricket and Welsh cricket.
I mean, that's true. I mean, many people have said it for a long, long time. I think the biggest problem has been that a lot of us over the years have known what the problem was, but human failure is that along the lines, a lot of us don't do anything about it. We know that it is wrong, but we don't do anything about it. That's why it's taken this amount of time, really, for some brave man. And I think Azim Rafiq has been quite brave in actually standing up to a conglomerate, really, like the ECB and others, to tell his story. But there are thousands and thousands of people out there, male and female, ethnic and others, who have a similar story to tell. And really, that is the real issue that needs to be dealt with.
OK, thank you so much, Roland Butcher. Really interesting to hear your insight this morning into the findings. You know what? Anyone who's known cricketers, they had their reputation for being...
It was very public school.
Boozy,
and it's quite public school, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, we had the big racism row at Yorkshire with Azim Rafiq, didn't we?
Yeah.
Saying that he'd experienced incredible racism.
But like you say, despite the whites, I always thought cricketers were terribly sort of buttoned up and proper and open-minded and accepting. This is suggested not all of them are. Right, former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has apologised for each death caused by COVID-19 as he gives evidence to the pandemic inquiry.
He's the latest high-profile politician to go before that inquiry, which, as you know, started in London and it's going to go on till 2026 or 2027. And it's all about the government's preparedness or lack of preparedness for the pandemic.
So joining us in the studio now is Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express, Lucy Johnson. Lucy, I know you've been making your way in, so you haven't been able to watch every bit of what Hancock has said. I've been watching what I can during the ad breaks, and it's making my blood boil. He's setting up this idea that there was a doctrine problem, he said, amongst governments around the world in the West. And the doctrine was, if we have a pandemic, we just have to buy body bags, and we don't do enough to stop the pandemic. But he's talking about about flu. He said we were prepared for a flu virus, but not a coronavirus. And he said, so there was only so much we could do for a respiratory disease. Well, coronavirus was a respiratory disease. So there's a lot of... He's getting himself into knots, in my opinion. What have you made of it?
I think you're absolutely right.
Obligation for the
confusion among...
Oh, sorry, Lucy, carry on. I thought we were playing a clip. Carry on.
No, that's fine. There seems to be a lot of confusion, I think, among the lawyers at the inquiry about the science around this. There are many viruses that can create a pandemic. Flu is one of them, coronaviruses are another. And what we did is actually threw away our knowledge, decades of knowledge on respiratory viruses. There was no reason to think that there would be no natural immunity to a coronavirus. There was no reason to think that masks would work when we had decades of work showing that they hadn't worked for other respiratory viruses. So in a sense, it didn't really matter. That's just about labelling. It was a good place to start. And we had knowledge of different pandemics, and we had actually had good plans for a flu pandemic, which would have helped us in our response to this. And they were lost in the organisational memory and totally forgotten. So, in fact,
but how do you lose it, Lucy? How does it get lost?
Well,
I don't get that.
The original plans were actually very good, and they had discussed lockdowns, they had discussed closing schools, and they had decided that it wouldn't do much good, and actually it was dangerous, as we now know. Those plans were... different committees had different meetings, and they were looked at by a broad spectrum of experts. So not just doctors and virologists, but people that understood the economy, they understood education, they understood... It was a societal response because, in fact, a pandemic is a societal threat. So you need a societal response. So what happened is those plans were there in 2005 and 6, and then they were revisited in 2015, I think, and found that, you know, they needed updating, they needed a bit of changing. But I think the experts that should have been doing that, the cabinet ministers that should have been doing that, were redeployed to Brexit, and there was obviously austerity, and there was just the memory of that became lost and sort of overwritten by new plans, and we sort of copied other countries and decided to
politicise.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and in fact, one question that needs to be asked today, Chris Whitty has said that it wasn't a scientific decision to lock down. Was Matt Hancock the person who asked SAGE to consider lockdown? We need to ask that.
And it's fascinating that, isn't it, Lucy? Because we were told again and again, ministers are following the science. And yet, he's suggesting a lot of these decisions were political. So they were overruling the scientists, or scientists were letting the politicians make the decisions.
Well, in a sense, what is the science? I mean, it is a novel virus, so the science, for one person, is different. But there is no such thing as the science with something that has not been well established. What the country needed to be was to adapt and to be flexible and to... I mean, I've been health editor for many years, and every year we have winter crises and we have pictures of ambulances backed up. Why are we not increasing capacity during those winter months? This was inevitable anyway, that it would happen in winter. And, of course, we had a pandemic, and we're still not looking at increasing our capacity.
And they were hiding behind the politicians were hiding behind the scientists, I think.
I think so too. They were hiding behind the scientists. They were not listening to certain other scientists. The Great Barrington Declaration came out of the traps really quickly. Sunita Gupta and co. to say, we need to target protection on the vulnerable, be better at that. And that's where the care homes come in. But they also said you need to consider the long-term implications of locking up healthy, young people on your economy, on your mental health crisis, on your NHS, on the long-term issues that we're now dealing with. And they were discredited. I mean, there was over 100 signatories on that document, Lucy, and they were marginalised and they were discredited. And we've seen the emails from Fauci in America saying they are fringe epidemiologists. They were previously the greatest in the world. These questions aren't going to get answered in this inquiry, are they?
That's exactly right. And I think the inquiry, like lawyer-led inquiries, are very good at looking at what happened, but not why they happened.
Yeah.
And it perhaps won't consider the idea that was a lockdown necessary at all? Why did we lock down? Back in 2005 and 6, we had dismissed that idea. Why did we ever go there? The inquiry is it's not going to look beyond 2010, so it's not going to ask that question. It's going to, I think Matt Hancock is now already saying it should have been harder, longer. Yeah. But there was no credible evidence of the time that social distancing would have snuffed out a respiratory virus once it had taken hold in a country. So what we did was threw away decades of knowledge, we threw away plans, and we threw away science, in effect, and reinvented it.
And we copied what other countries were doing, Lucy. That was the point, didn't we?
Yeah.
There was a sense of panic. Oh, everybody else is doing it, we have to do it too.
Yeah.
And Labour were crying for action too, and I think that the government panicked.
I think it did.
With its 80 majority.
That's it, and I think it will be... I think it will be very surprising if the inquiry can actually get to the depth of that, because people will come in and just look at these superficial reasons for what went, the individual things about what went wrong here and there. The children have suffered, perhaps we'll do it again and not close schools. Actually, the whole idea of locking a society down was an experiment, and perhaps we could say should never be repeated.
It's interesting, I'm thinking about what you said then about this inquiry might work out the what happened, but not necessarily the why, because when we were saying the politicians panicked, yes, there was panic, but there was also vested interests. There was also money to be made. And I am as furious with Labour about this as I am with the Conservatives. In fact, more, I would say I have more anger, because every time that the MPs or people in positions of power, whether it was Nadhim Zahawi, whether it was Sajid Javid, whether it was Boris Johnson, and somebody in the House of Commons had the opportunity to stand up and ask some questions, they didn't. Journalists weren't doing it, MPs weren't doing it. They were getting a free ride, and I've never seen a time in history with that sort of consensus where nobody said, what is the questions that let's all just step back here and find out. But it's a vote winner. It was, unfortunately, it was popular with the public as well.
It was. Yeah, and the YouGov polls showed consistently. But public health is always about advice, or had always been about advice and guidance and support. It wasn't about stigmatising, and it wasn't about fear-based messaging. And I think that was a new thing that we did, and I think the public was frightened, and I think many people still are frightened, which was wrong. So there was no one...
The fear was real.
The fear was real, but there was no one employed to get people to understand their own individual risk. Everyone thought they were at risk because of this blanket idea that this was a scary thing. So we didn't stratify it, and, even children, were made to be scared.
Yeah. Well, we will carry on watching the COVID inquiry through my fingers.
Can you face 4 years of it, Lucy?
Well, I think it's another way of kicking things into the long grass, isn't it? And they can say, well, the inquiry will deal with that, which means that the current administration doesn't have to actually...
And by which point, the likes of Matt Hancock will have ridden off into the sunset, made his millions from selling his books and being on TV. Lucy Johnson from the Sunday Express, thank you so much. Right, still to come after a fiery and vitriolic address last night. We're going to look at Vladimir Putin, his chances of political survival following this weekend's attempted coup. First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:25. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Beth Turner.
You've been getting in touch this morning. We were discussing the COVID inquiry. Leon in Northampton says, good morning, Bev and Andrew. I believe that Matt Hancock was just a pawn in the grand scheme of things. I wouldn't trust him to clean my car, let alone prepare for a pandemic. He's just the script reader who will read whatever is in front of him.
And lots of people also talking about education, sex education. Helen says, I disagree with Nigel Nelson, says parents should not have a veto over what their children are taught in schools. They absolutely should. Parents produce their children from their bodies. They absolutely, positively should have the last word, but they won't get it.
Absolutely. And Sandra, this is so true. She said, just listening to a few minutes of that COVID inquiry, it makes me realise what a waste of time this is. Just money-making for the lawyers. We should follow Sweden. What a... I can't use that word, blooming waste of hard-working taxpayers' money.
And did you see the rows and rows of officials in that public inquiry, which is going to cost hundreds of millions of pounds?
It's awful.
And we say it will be done in 4 years. Just to remind you, the inquiry into Bloody Sunday took 12 years.
Initial cost for that, 40 million quid with Baroness Hallett there, and that is lawyers. Ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching.
Now, let's go back to Russia, because Vladimir Putin last night delivered an extraordinary speech, rambling, talking about how he is going to pursue all the mutineers.
That's right. And James Cleverly this morning confirmed that if there was a civil war in Russia, we wouldn't be able to airlift out or evacuate British citizens. I think that's probably going a bit too far. I don't think we're going to get to that yet, are we?
Nowhere near a civil war.
But this is what President Putin said in his televised address.
The organisers of the rebellion, betraying their country, their people, betrayed those who were lured into the crime. They lied to them, pushed them towards death, under fire, to shoot their own people. It was precisely this outcome, fratricide, that Russia's enemies wanted. Both the neo-Nazis in Kiev and their Western masters, and all sorts of national traitors. They wanted Russian soldiers to kill each other.
And of course, that rambling rant followed a message from the mercenary leader Prigozhin in which he called his advance on Moscow a masterclass and said the Russian public were disappointed when he stopped.
So let's get the thoughts of Russian expert Danny Armstrong. Good morning, Danny. Good to see you. What are your thoughts on this and what Putin said last night?
Well, yeah, of course, it was a day of high drama from Prigozhin, drama from Putin. He said this announcement would decide the fate of Russia. Of course, there was nowhere near that. There was nowhere near anything that lived up to that drama. And of course, there was drama in the West that's saying they were near civil war in Russia. Of course, they're sowing the seeds of wanting disarray in Russia. Of course, I mean, Putin, an ex-KGB agent as he is, would sort of want people to think that he's weak and want people to think that Russia is on the verge of collapse because then his enemies reveal themselves. There's a certain amount of voices that are talking about a psyop in Russia, whether this was all planned. One thing that people do need to realise was that this was never about Putin. This was never about ousting Putin. This was never about a change in leadership. There was no conversations in Russia about that. Prigozhin himself said it was against the Russian Ministry of Defense, against Shoigu and Gerasimov, who wanted to destroy Wagner and his men. There was no real conversations in Russia about whether Prigozhin would be a better leader, about whether Putin's leadership was challenged. And of course, as we see, any mutiny or rebellion or armed insurrection, as it's called in Russia, has simply gone away. And if anything, Putin is a master consolidator. If he keeps the order and the balance between these rivals and between these factions that are fractured and infighting wherever they may be, and of course, historically, the armies of a nation, whether they be private, as the private military company Wagner are, or the Ministry of Defense, have posed the greatest threat to the leader. So, I mean, with Wagner in exile, either in exile in Belarus or joining the Ministry of Defense, and with Prigozhin himself, of course, he's lost this mutiny, he's lost this rebellion, he turned around, he's lost a lot of support that he did have with the Russian people. He's also in Belarus. I mean, so in terms of, if we're looking at what's been reported in the West about Putin maybe being weaker, it would be the opposite. The West like to give a sort of a version of events that aren't really portrayed in Russia. Of course, in Russia, where we have Wagner was seen as heroes and then they became traitors. In Russia, these people were cutthroats and vagabonds, and then they were freedom fighters when they were marching on the Kremlin.
Danny, is Prigozhin going to end up with a bullet in his head in Belarus, putting it crudely?
Well, I wouldn't like to say. I mean, coming from somebody who was there in Russia when it all kicked off on February 24th, when the invasion was actually announced, I was actually the first person to give a translation of Putin's speech. So this Putin's speech yesterday was of great interest to me. And from what I saw from Vladimir Putin, he put out this announcement in direct response to what Prigozhin had said. There was an 11-minute even more rambling. And of course, Andrew, you said that Vladimir Putin at the start, he was rambling in his announcements. Prigozhin put out a fantastically theatrical 11-minute audio message on his Telegram channel. It was very unapologetic. He said he did this march of justice on Moscow for the right reasons, and he didn't offer any real signs of remorse.
Danny, can I just ask you, let me just ask you one more question. You're a Manchester boy, I know that, and you went out to Russia and you were a fluent Russian speaker, and as you said, you were translating Putin's speeches for a long time. How did he seem yesterday to you? You've analysed what he says many times.
He seemed to me like he was putting a clear message across that he is strong, the Russian people are strong. The first thing he did was thank them for their unity, and the second thing he did was say that the West, they want this fratricide. Now, that was something that really evokes strong emotions in the Russian people, because any threat from the West, the Russian people tend to come together and to be unified and to be strong. So in terms of Putin being maybe weak and his political career sort of coming to an end with this, this potential rebellion or mutiny or even civil war, as some people put it, I would say it's exactly the opposite. Putin, in consolidating this power and bringing this balance, could even be stronger.
I think you're right. I think that's an interesting perspective. Thank you, Danny Armstrong. Always good to talk to you. Now, still to come this morning, has Boris Johnson's new relationship with a national newspaper already got him into trouble? We're going to have the latest after your morning news with Tamsin.
Thank you. Here are the headlines at 11:32. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock says he is profoundly sorry for each death caused by COVID-19 as he gives evidence to the pandemic inquiry. During his testimony, Mr Hancock was asked why there was little or no work done on preparing care homes. He explained he didn't have any data on what was going on in the care homes on the ground before the pandemic. Mr Hancock also says he was reassured by the World Health Organization that the UK was the best placed country in the world to handle a pandemic. Then he added that they were wrong in that. Nicola Bulley's sister has told an inquest there was a blip in her mental state a month before her death. The inquest also heard from Nicola Bulley's former GP, who said there was nothing in her medical records to suggest she was suicidal. Yesterday, the inquest heard that the mother of two died as a result of drowning. Nicola Bulley disappeared in January whilst walking her dog along the River Wyre in Lancashire. Her body was found 3 weeks later. New measures have been announced to tackle the non-consensual sharing of intimate images online. Amendments to the Online Safety Bill will remove the need to prove intent to cause distress, making it easier to charge and convict offenders. Those found guilty could face up to 6 months in jail and, if the intent to distress is proven, a maximum of 2 years in custody. The government is being urged to rule out detaining or forcibly removing children to Rwanda whose families are seeking asylum in the UK. The Women and Equalities Committee says the risks of harm to asylum-seeking children outweigh any risk of damage to the government's aim of deterrence through its illegal migration bill. The Home Office says ministers could spend £169,000 on each person forcibly removed. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Well, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2724 and €1.1626. The price of gold is £1,512 and 34 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,456 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Now, coming up at 12 o'clock, it is the live desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson, day 2. Here to tell us all about it. How was day 1?
We're still here.
Yeah, still standing, as Elton John says. Plenty on the agenda as you've been running through today. I mean, we've got the latest from the COVID inquiry, Matt Hancock. I mean, some pretty desperate stuff for those families wanting answers. We got it completely wrong, as we've been indicating. You know, can we buy enough body bags? Where are we going to bury the dead? Yeah. They were asking the wrong questions instead of preparing. I mean, it's quite an admittance.
Yeah, and he's also in the last few moments saying that more should have been done to prepare for a proper lockdown.
Yeah,
so he is still speaking.
More should have been done to ask what are going to be the cost benefits of this in the long run. Are we going to be sitting here in 2023 with a crippling economy and no houses for anyone to buy?
Yeah, I think they're concentrating obviously on the human cost, though, in terms of those people outside the inquiry wanting to find out what could have been done better. The other thing, you know, human angles all the way through today. We've got the Nicola Bulley inquest. Her sister's been giving evidence, and you know, it's a really difficult picture for the family to get, because we've got a mental health expert saying no indication she was depressed. Louise Cunningham, her sister, says no, she had a blip in her mental health back at Christmas. So, you know, what happened?
Yeah, and actually her partner's just been speaking, Mark, as well, her partner, Paul Ansell, and he's been saying that he believes she was reaching for the dog's harness, to put the harness on her dog before she fell. And if you remember, she was on that work Teams call that was still going. When she disappeared. So that inquest, it's just so sad.
One of the deepest points in that river.
Key to this is a police news conference after the inquest, we now know.
Which we will be
soon
across.
after, so we're going to have that live.
Yeah.
Also, the latest from Kyiv on what's going on in Belarus, if that makes sense.
What is going on?
Because we've got a journalist who's been speaking to the Belarus opposition, because we know Prigozhin's landed this morning, and now Wagner are surrendering all their heavy weapons. Have they actually put their hands up?
So that sounds like victory for Putin.
Well, that's the question.
It's very
has he
hard
won
to
this
believe,
particular
yeah.
battle, but maybe not the war?
And also, just very finally, just about supermarket prices. I'm not sure which camera I'm on. Which camera am I on?
Oh, don't worry.
Anyone will do.
We've been here for a while. We never know.
They're not fussy.
There you are. How much are you paying at the moment for your eggs, for your meat, for your bread? Because supermarket bosses are being quizzed by MPs about have they, really done as much as they can to help people with the cost of living crisis. The chief executive of Morrison's, he's just been speaking, and he is very hopeful that prices are going to start to come down.
They've come down a bit, but not enough.
Right, don't go anywhere.
And their profits have gone up.
Keep these two on for the rest of the afternoon. We are going to have Tonya and Nigel Nelson back in Britain's newsroom in just a moment. See you in a couple.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:42. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Well, join us again to go through the big stories of the day. Our senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and, of course, political commentator, Tonya Buxton. Good morning to you both again.
Right, shall we talk about Liam Fox? He has been talking about what a woman is, Tonya.
Well, I'm glad that he's called it out. You know, he's called it out.
Tory MP, remind people who he is, Liam Fox.
So, Liam,
former Tory chairman, former Defence Secretary.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's one of the few politicians that are actually standing up and saying, there's just a minute saying, for goodness sake, somewhere along the line we have to have the facts and rationality in these conversations, because facts do matter. So by him coming out and standing tall and saying, look, a woman is a young female adult or young, whatever it is, not someone with a penis.
Yeah.
A woman cannot be someone with a penis. You know, Keir Starmer cannot say that. He said that very few women have penises. I mean, the fact that there's no common sense, there's no rationality, there's no facts to this. It's all this airy-fairy thinking, which is leading our children down a very bad garden path, as we've discussed before. It makes me very proud that he's come out. Wouldn't it be great if all the politicians just came out and stood against the rubbish?
And Liam, of course, remember, he's a former GP. And
I did not know that.
Yeah, he is. So he's got practical experience of dealing with children and kids' problems about coming out and all that.
But doctors are now afraid to do that. So I did not know he was a doctor, and that makes it even better that he's coming out and saying that. But of course, Nigel will disagree with it.
I will disagree on the basis that... well, let's take the first bit. Absolutely right that a woman is an adult female, but in law, for most purposes, a woman can also be, and this is in the dictionary definitions nowadays, can also have been born a man.
And this is where the law is an arse.
Well, the law might be, but it is the law. So it follows from that a woman can have a penis, because if you get a gender recognition certificate, you can get one without having any surgery, without having any puberty blockers, without having any opposite sex hormones. And from that point onwards, you are regarded, again, for most purposes, obviously women's spaces is an issue, women's sports an issue. You can't go to jail with male genitalia, or a women's jail with male genitalia. But in most other respects, you can get a driving licence, you can change your birth certificate and get a passport. So in law, that is the position at the moment.
And unfortunately, it's a very wrong position, because it either is or it isn't. It is or it isn't, and it clearly isn't, because if you can't go to a prison, and if you can't, you shouldn't be able to compete in women's sports, and you shouldn't be going into spaces that are women only, it clearly...
That's why the law needs to be updated. I mean, this goes back to the Gender Recognition Act 2004, so we're almost 20 years out of date with this. I mean, it really does need to be re-looked at, particularly for those issues.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree absolutely about women's spaces. I think that women-only spaces is absolutely right. I think it's absolutely right that somebody with male genitalia should not go to a woman's prison. These are the kind of bits that need to be cleared up, rather like sport is now getting around to doing at the moment.
But the main thing, I think, is that this shouldn't be infiltrating our schools and affecting our children. For me, that's where it starts. Whatever adults want to do and say to each other, that's fine. Do and say it, and whatever you please, it's fine. But stop confusing children, and it is confusing children. Other children who might be gay and now thinking, well, maybe I'm in the wrong body, which is a great mistake, or those that have other issues. And when you have anxiety, when you're self-harming, in my day it was self-harming and anorexia. A lot of my friends and people that I knew had that. I think they might be in the gender thing now, because you've just got to stop and ask the questions. Is there a more in-deep inquiry need to be made to these children before just automatically accepting what they're saying?
Right, someone who couldn't care less about this sort of issue, President Putin. He's got much more important things on his hands, Nigel. He's denounced this rebellion, but urges Russians to forgive the misguided mercenaries.
This is the weirdest story.
Isn't it?
I don't think anybody knows exactly what is going on here. We've had endless experts coming out, but certainly yesterday the Prime Minister didn't know what was happening, the Foreign Secretary didn't know what was happening. And yes, we get this sort of contradictory lines coming out of Moscow. So on one hand, he's saying, yep, I'll pardon everybody. Prigozhin will go off to Belarus, and that will be the end of it. And then he's talking about punishing the mutineers. There's something else going on that we don't know about, because I can't see that Prigozhin ever thought he would be able to spark off a military coup. He says it was never his intention.
Yeah.
So what was he doing marching on Moscow? Did he want to just cause a civil war? don't know.
Well, isn't it that the Ministry of Defence were unhappy with him and wanted to get rid of him anyway, and he's kind of gone out on his own terms? Who knows how much money he's been paid? I mean, who's paid him and how much? Because that's basically how it works in that part of the world. It is a murky, dark sea of corruption.
And there are reports now, too, that they're giving up some of their heavy armaments.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I mean, the other worry is if they really do have 25,000 fighters who they've taken out of jail, where are they going to end up at the end of all this? So it is all really dangerous. But the idea they could have ever taken over.
No, I'm just going to go live because Putin just to let you know, Putin is speaking again. So we're hearing a lot. So he's obviously feeling emboldened. He's no longer hiding away.
His third time, won't it?
Furious, isn't he?
Yeah.
But you know, also, you know, if you're looking at social media and what some the people from the West were trying to say is in kind of disguise is that we were behind this.
We, as in the UK, or
no,
the West?
No, the West generally
Oh,
had
it'd be
something
really
to do with it.
if we were.
It'd be very dangerous if we were, and what's going on. But you know, these guys, they do what they do for money.
Yeah,
so who was paying the money? Who gave him the money to do this? Where did it come from?
I mean, Biden has come out and denied it. He's made a statement saying that we didn't pay Prigozhin to go away and desert the Russian army. I think it's plausible. They obviously have to, because somebody paid them. Somebody's paid him. Somebody's paid him.
But has it backfired now, Nigel, if he is giving up his armaments and Putin we're now hearing speaking for the third time, because we thought he'd done a runner to Petersburg initially.
And we think he's in Belarus now. I mean, that seems to be where he's ended up. And the question then, obviously, is whether or not this whole episode has weakened Putin's authority or not. The mere fact that Putin keeps coming out and talking about it would suggest he thinks it has.
That he thinks it has weakened him.
Yes.
So he has to keep showing that he's the man in charge.
Yes.
But you see, Danny Armstrong's take was very interesting earlier, our Russian expert, because he was saying that in some ways this might strengthen Putin to the Russian people.
Yeah.
Because what did they not want? What they did not want is a civil war on their pavements. And those pictures which came out over the weekend looked like that was what was about to happen, didn't it? A couple of 100 miles or so from Moscow, and they were put on the streets, and we were genuinely thought we were facing a civil war and bloodshed of Russian people.
Yeah.
If Putin has averted that somehow, then they see him as a hero again.
That's what I mean about we really don't know what is lying behind this. It could be absolutely the whole thing was staged.
Yeah.
That at the end of the day, that Putin becomes
between the two of them.
Yeah, and Putin becomes the saviour. We're now getting into the realms of sort of mad conspiracy theories.
But you know what?
But you would never know with these people.
It's plausible.
Yeah.
But it's possible.
Remember, the state media is absolutely controlled in Russia as well, so we're only getting one version.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Right, should we talk about something completely different?
Let's have a fun one, shall we?
Yes. I think this story will... if we want a fun one, how long have we got? Let's go... Let's talk about Meghan Markle's fall from grace, Tanya.
I know.
I know Andrew's going to enjoy this one.
Our very own Dan Wootton did a great take on this in his column. Basically, he said, you know, Taylor Swift can take you down. You know, in one of her songs, if she just talks about you, she can take you down.
Yeah.
She didn't even bother to write a reply to her. So Meghan requested that Taylor Swift would come on her podcasts, which are now defunct, aren't they?
Yeah.
20 million was she given, or she's
whatever.
having to give back or whatever now. And so she asked Taylor Swift to go on it. And, you know, Taylor Swift must get hundreds of requests to go on podcasts and do lots of things. And, you know, she'll only reply to the important people personally. And she didn't bother to reply to her. She just got one of her minions to say no thanks.
Humiliating for Meghan, actually.
Humiliating and so well deserved.
Yeah, who when she was trying to butter up senators, was introducing herself as, this is the Duchess of Sussex.
Yeah.
You'd think she might say, hello, I'm Meghan Markle.
Meghan, especially in America.
Especially in America.
It does seem with this one that there were big box office when they were spilling the secrets of the royal family.
That's right.
That's what everyone wanted to hear. Now they're trying to branch out and become kind of media figures and produce things.
And they're not interesting.
Exactly.
They're both too dim. They are both too dim.
Yeah.
They don't have a sparkle. There is no shine. There's no, not like you two guys coming out and
you know what?
sparkling.
They don't have. You know what they don't have, Tanya? They don't have any real friends telling them the truth. You know, some days I come in here, Tanya will come in and she'll look at me and she'll go, "Oh, you need a bit more blusher on today." And she gets a brush out.
Nigel says the same to me.
Gives me a little touch up. Now, I don't think they've got any friends in their life that are completely honest with them.
No, because they've got rid of anybody that would try to speak the truth. You know, they've got rid of everyone, so they're in this position.
haven't even got family who can tell them, because she doesn't speak to her family, he doesn't speak to his.
Exactly. So
Extraordinary.
But I think it's well deserved by her. The fact that Taylor Swift, who would have thought that she would be the one that was going to really bring them down?
That will hurt. That will really hurt Meghan Markle.
And it'll be widely reported in America, where they need to be very popular to make their money.
Absolutely.
Look at your crystal ball, Nigel. What happens to the Sussexes now, do you think, in the next few years?
I think they kind of quietly disappear.
I think so.
Because I just don't see where they go from here. They've dropped the bombshells. They've now fallen out with the royal family, unpopular in Britain. I think they've got enough money to quietly retire.
Can I just put in what I think is going to happen within the next 5 years?
Go on.
Meghan Markle's going to leave him.
Yeah.
Because he's done his job. You know, she got what she needed from him. She doesn't love him. No woman treats her man like that when they love him. So she doesn't love him. She's going to leave him, and then he's going to go back with his tail between his legs to his family. Within 5 years.
But she still has political ambitions of her own, doesn't she, of course?
She does.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
There's no one more dim than those that don't know they're dim.
She wants to be a Nancy Pelosi figure, a woman speaker in America. A very powerful figure in America, of course, the woman's the speaker.
Yeah.
One of the most powerful after the president.
Yeah.
Do you think she's got a future as a politician?
No.
You're supposed to be on her side. You're the lefty who normally...
Yeah, but I don't think that Meghan Markle is a left or right issue, really.
No. Well, I don't know, actually.
Oh, do you know what you could do? You could put on your political editor hat and you could message her and say, I want to interview you as a political editor. She'd give you an interview.
I'll try it.
She would be flattered by that, wouldn't she?
We'll try that on GBNews.
Yeah, she wouldn't come on with us two, but she do that. She'll be deeply flattered. Right, we have come to the end of our show.
Exactly.
Thank you, Tonya. Thank you, Nigel, as always. Coming up next is the Live Desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. We'll be back with Britain's Newsroom on GB News tomorrow at 9:30.
See you then.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A drab day for many today. A lot of cloud around, outbreaks of rain across much of the country as well. In the south, though, it is remaining dry for the time being, thanks to this area of high pressure just about holding on, but low pressure further north is dominating, and these weather fronts have been moving in, already bringing quite a bit of wet weather across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, through Northern England and Wales, and it will continue to gradually drift eastwards, so eventually the rain turning up across Lincolnshire and Aberdeenshire as well. Parts of Northern Ireland, particularly in the east towards Belfast, may actually brighten up a little this afternoon, and in the south we'll keep a lot of cloud, but here too some brightness. Could see temperatures getting into the low 20s. We might get to 20 or 21 in Belfast, but with the cloud, the outbreaks of rain further north and west, temperatures mostly in the high teens. Quite a humid feel through this evening and overnight. It turns quite misty in places around the coast in the west. The rain will tend to peter out mostly. We'll keep some light rain and drizzle over the hills of northern England and Wales, but many places will be